Hello, everyone. All right. So I'll start off with a quick introduction. My name is Ahmed Riaz, and I've been thinking about designing full experiences for a very long time. This is sort of like just a little snapshot of my career thus far. And so, I studied industrial design, worked at this place called Explain. I was at eBay for a while. And then while I was at CCA, I ended up doing my thesis on designing for kids in emerging markets and how they can sort of think about design thinking as a way for them to envision a world that's different than the world that they live in. And so I ended up doing a TED Talk on that. And from there, I ended up working at Frog, and I was there for about 7 years. And that was a great experience. And, I went from all the way from being an interaction designer to being a creative director there. And then the last 6-ish years have been at Logitech. So I was at Logitech as head of UX strategy, and then I started becoming head of Astro Gaming. And then from there, I'm now head of G, which is Gamers and Creators. And so one of the things I really wanted to talk about was just this philosophy, this etymology about what I've been really thinking about in terms of like designing playful experiences. So if you think about design, this is a very famous quote, which is form follows function. It comes from the Bauhaus, and sort of this idea of like the form of an object should really be following what you want to be doing with that. What is the functionality of that object? And it comes from kind of this Bauhaus world. But if you think about it, look at the images on the right-hand side, you see that even the Bauhaus people were kind of not taking it so seriously. But then along came this guy, Dieter Rams. He took it very seriously. And he's not from the Bauhaus. He was about 20 years later. And he was like, no, it has to be very functional. In fact, it should be as minimal as possible, as little design as possible. And I think what happens a lot of times is when people think about form follows function, they actually end up thinking a lot about Dieter Rams. And they end up thinking a lot about kind of the history of German design and the real focus on functionality. And if you think of Dieter Rams, you also end up thinking a little bit about Apple because, Apple's design philosophy and some of the things follow a little bit of Dieter Rams' look and feel. Then you have this other guy who looks like David Hasselhoff, and he's not. He is Hartmut Esslinger. He's the head of Frog Design. So Frog Design was really known for designing the Apple Macintosh. But before that, and I like to show these other images too, which are more interesting to me in some ways. Before that, they were actually known for designing Sony's products. So they did this early Walkman. They did these mice, Logitech, that looked like actual mice. They did Sony Vega TVs and did these commercials that were like these characters played around them. And they were very bold and kind of really had this philosophy that wanted to think about a new way of pushing form follows function. And so what Esslinger used to say was form follows emotion. So a lot of the thinking there was like, it really isn't about the functionality, it's really about the emotion, the identity that people have, and how do we sort of feed into that emotional identity. And obviously I worked here for about 7 years, so some of that seeped into my brain. But for me, I think I was really excited about one emotion in particular. I was excited about the emotion of playfulness, about the emotion of fun, about the emotion of joy. And I think a lot of that was because this headset that we created on the left-hand side, which is the Astro A30, for me, the headset is not the full object. The object is a person wearing the headset with that face. That's what the product is. A chair is not the object. It's the person sitting on the chair. It's how they feel. The chair and the person together complete the whole experience. And that's really, really, really important. And so for me, it was coming from this background of teaching. This is me teaching kids design thinking for a day. I was a school teacher. For an entire day, I took over an art class. And instead of teaching art, I taught these kids just design thinking from morning to day. And you see just kind of like, I remember this moment where one of the kids asked me, it's like, sir, can I have more than one Post-it? And my heart was just broke a little bit. I'm like, yes, you may have as many Post-its as you like. You don't need to be limited at all. And it's sort of this idea that why don't we open all this up? And another aspect of it was just sort of coming from Pakistan and having an aspect of, these Pakistani trucks, and it's just one example, but just a world where like you have access to a lot more color. And so I wanted to do this stuff, but I was living in this world that still felt like very constrained. It still felt like everyone was like, well, this is all great, but you know deep down inside that less is better, less is more, And in my brain, I was like, no, more is more. And so I wanted to kind of put this talk together just to kind of maybe put together some things that I feel like I've been learning, thinking about, and working in this space. It could have been more is more, but I'm calling it sort of form follows fun. And so one of the lessons I feel like I've learned is you really need to embrace the creative chaos. I think a key part of that is trusting your designers. I find that in a lot of different places, you can sort of overanalyze data and be like, data is king. You have to can I get more data on this? It's like, at some point, you just need to sort of like really embrace the chaos. Let people sort of develop things. Create a place where people feel safe to try things, and really have almost like a writer's room type of philosophy. So you have people put in a room and you're like, look, we're going to come up with as many ideas as possible, put them out in the world and see really what's resonating and what's sticking, as opposed to trying to build things almost like a house of cards, one after another after another. The second lesson learned is really playing to people's identity. This idea of like people's identity of themselves. So on the top you have this, there's this great book called Alter Ego by Robbie Cooper. And it's just full of pages of people in their normal world. So there's a picture of them and then their virtual avatar. And it's kind of like, it's like how they see themselves. And one of the things I learned in designing playful experiences as a group was we did better when we did things like what we have at the bottom there. So we let people build their own thing. And even when they weren't personalizing it, because you can get down there, if it had a lot of personality that felt like, you see me, you know who I am, and I'm gonna get this thing. There's something a little bit deeper there. And so I think with playful experiences, one of the things that becomes really important is really kind of like connecting to people's sense of identity and their sense of belonging, which maybe you don't have as much when you do something that's very minimal and, looking at something that's kind of like for everybody. The other thing I think is really important is like just having the courage to be foolish. So this is one of my favorite designers, Naoto Fukusawa, and juice peel packaging. And it makes me laugh every time I see it, because it's just like, it's the most beautiful thing to see. It's just banana juice. It looks like a banana peel, right? And I'm fortunate enough, I actually work with somebody that's worked with Fukusawa. And one of the things he always tells me is like, in the time he worked with him, it's like he would always say, think again. So you just come up with an idea and you'd be like, think again. Like try harder. Find something that's like that, a little deeper meaning, And I think it's one of these ideas. It's not enough to just make something. I think you need to have a place where people feel safe to play test their crazy ideas. It's like, I have a feeling this could really work. Let me try it. And if you create that safe environment, then they'll play test those ideas and something might catch and something might not. And so really I call it sort of prototyping foolishness. It's like you have to create a place where you can do that. The next thing is really about having fun on multiple levels. So one of the things that games often have, and really good movies that Pixar often have, is they work at multiple levels. They'll work for a child, and they'll also have jokes that kind of only adults will get, right? In a game, and right here you have Psychonauts, you can play the entire game, you just play all the missions, but you can also do this meta game, which is, if you look at those sketches, they're individually drawn sketches on every single level. So someone went and hand drew sketches on every single level, and they're called figments. And the game, if you haven't played Psychonauts, is all about this person traveling into someone else's mind and different characters' mind and helping them unravel their mental problems. And so these figments are just things you collect. You absolutely do not have to collect them to finish the game, but they're there. And what they're doing is they're creating another layer of this game. They're giving you a choice, a sense of agency to say, hey, this is the way you can do this, but if you want, you can come in and pick up every Korok. You look for every Korok seed on Zelda, and this is something games do. So I think looking at sort of ways in your designs to find ways to layer things in and incorporating them is really, really critical. So another thing is designing a joyful journey. So this is the example I think about is sometimes I feel like I'm sitting in design reviews and someone's like, well, this is the easiest way to do it. I'm like, okay, that's the easiest way to do it. But if you're playing golf, that's sort of, and I don't play golf, but I'm just saying, I play it on video game golf maybe. But I would say like the easiest golf would be just, hey, the hole is right there. You just put it in. It's too easy. You need to give a little bit of a challenge, or you need to create a little bit more of a journey, right? And so really thinking about what is that whole journey that you're sort of building out, and maybe it'll be slower. And I feel like that's where people get trapped a lot of times too, is that they're trying to create things that are almost non-existent in some ways. And that's fine. Not everything has to be a playful experience that's taking your full focus, right? A lot of stuff is canvas. But if something is supposed to take your focus, then you really should try to make it something that considers that entire journey. So really think of it as much more a park ride, or just giving it a little bit more of transitions as you're going down that path. Even if it's longer, might be more fun. Right. And this is not loading. All right. And then another part of it is moments of escape. So if we do this all right, the thing that would be really important here is you end up with something that makes you feel like you have this little moment of escape. Something that's designed to be fun isn't like something you're using every day that's supposed to disappear into the background. It's giving you this little elevated moment, this little joyful piece of your life. And so when you have that little moment of escape, you can have that bit of elevation and you sort of kind of enter into a whole different world. And that's really important as well. So these are the 8 things. I think the one that didn't load was end with Easter eggs. So what I'm going to do is actually show you an egg that I brought with me. So what was on that slide was actually this bag. And on this bag, if you notice, is a little code. I'll pass the bag along. Please no one steal it. But if you look at it over here, there's a little code. And what it is coordinates. So here, I'll pass it and you can pass it to the left and just kind of look at it. That's an Easter egg. And so, no one needs to know. I don't know if anyone else in the world knows this Easter egg. So maybe right now when I'm sharing, everyone's going to find out. And if you take those coordinates and you put them into Google Maps, it will lead you to the Yoda statue in San Francisco. That's all it does. And no one needs to know that. And it's something, why do we do it? We do it because we love making things. We do it because we want people to know that we love making things. So having that little tiny little piece of Easter egg, I don't know, for the people making things, it's like saying, hey, I was here. And if you think about the origins of Easter eggs, that's what they were created for, right? The first game to have an Easter egg was Adventure, where you could go into a certain level and find the creator putting their name there because they were not allowed to put their names. And they wanted to say, hey, I was here. I made this for you. I hope you enjoy it. That's all it said. So these are kind of some of the things that I feel like I've learned in the years that I've been designing playful experiences. That's it. Thank you. All right. So I'll open it up to questions, kind of if anyone has, and we'll pass this up.
You worked at eBay. What was the biggest lessons you learned there?
The biggest lessons at eBay? He's also asking if there's another mic, but I think we can just pass it back and forth. The biggest lessons I learned at eBay. I think when I was at eBay, a lot of people there were very happy to be in one place at eBay. They're like, hey, I do buyers and those people do sellers. Don't talk to sellers, the selling team. And I was like, no, I'm going to go talk to the selling team because it's just one website. And so I think what I learned at eBay was don't listen to your boss and go do what's right. And so I would go talk to the selling team and the buying team and be like, hey, how do we create a great experience together? So I think what I learned at eBay was how to create bridges and how to really connect things. And the fact that sometimes that gets you in trouble, but it's still worthwhile. Not the question I was expecting.
Thank you for the talk. Very interesting examples. I've been working in B2B environments before, and if I would have tried to make the case for Playful experience, I may have gotten some pushback asking for the ROI on that. What would be your response to?
So one of the lessons learned I took out was not every experience has to be a playful experience. Right? Not everything has to be loud. Some things can be quiet. And so I think for B2B, it's tricky to say something has to be playful, other than to say people spend a lot of their times at work. And you should enjoy the environment that you're in, right? You could buy, and I find this a lot of times too, you could buy something that's like, hey, this is a Post-it note that sort of works. It's not the best one. Or you could buy something that's like, this peels really good. I know it's an example about Post-it notes. I could use digital examples too, but I don't want to call anyone out. But this idea of like, I always appreciate when people buy the best tools because they have a little extra quality to them. So I think for B2B, I would say you need to decide, is it a playful experience or not? And you may decide it's not. But in what you are designing, I think you should still make it as inviting an experience as possible, because we're human beings living in those experiences, whether they're physical or whether they're digital. Yeah. Shout out your question, I'll repeat it. Okay, the question is, when you have conflicting design feedback, how do you know which one's right and which one's wrong? I think when we have conflicting design feedback, I think the first thing that's important is to hear all the feedback. When you're hearing feedback, that is almost like a moment of design research. You're just hearing all the research. You as a design team always have control over what you're synthesizing and acting on. So don't ever in that moment say, yeah, I'm gonna do it. Always say, thank you for that feedback. I'm gonna listen to it, and we're gonna figure out what to do next. And then you take all that feedback, and then you as a team decide, hey, this is what we should do next. And because I'll tell you this, it doesn't matter if who that feedback's coming from, right? Sometimes it's like, well, this person said this, so we have to do it. Well, I found sometimes the same people will later on say, why did you mess this up? And you can never go back to them and say, well, you told me to. You know, you have to take responsibility over the design. And if you feel like you have responsibility over the design, then you have the agency to synthesize that feedback and decide what to do. That might be something you're asking right now. I can see it in your head. It's like, do I have that agency or not? Maybe, I don't know. Or maybe you're just thinking of the next question. In software. I saw something recently that I'm trying to remember where I saw it. It was sort of like this apologies, we're working really hard, don't mind our dust type of moment that I wasn't expecting. I think it was like in Discord or something that I was seeing. And there's a lot of messages there that like show up where you're like, oh, this is really, they created like 4 or 5 different like, I'm not working screens. I always enjoy those. The other thing that I feel like I've really enjoyed recently is, this isn't software per se, but on the Rivian R1S and R1T, there's an extra flashlight that's in the door. And that's just so that they can have like a crazy number, I think 999 batteries in the car. And so they're like, oh, we have 998 batteries. And they weren't trying to do that. Like I've heard interviews of like the Rivian CEO be like, this wasn't intentional. We weren't trying to put a extra one there, but we just realized we were off by one. And then we decided to like take an extra step and put another one in there. And I think the way I heard it was like, he's like, they just did it and then they told me they did it. And I think that's kind of the other part of it, is like just leaving room for that to happen. I would say something I miss in software is sort of the I'm not doing anything with the computer screensaver mode. Not that a screen happens, but just like, you would have this in old video games where like the character would just start, Sonic would tap his feet and, do something. I feel like something like that would be really fun to put into, just to be like, yeah, we know this happens. We know you're on this screen waiting for your other person to join Zoom or something, right? Like just that anticipation of something that people typically do. Again, it comes back to that, really knowing the personality, saying like, hey, I see you. Because that connection, that belonging is what people really want. Okay. All right, I'll try to summarize the question. What do you see happening in the world of prompts and data, large language models, and how those interfaces are shifting? And I'm going to give it a layer of like playfulness too, which I don't know if you asked. Okay. I think this is what I'm excited about. So there used to be these old video games like Quest for Glory, where you would type things in as like command prompts, right? And I see some people nodding and smiling. They were fun because you could write anything in them. And sometimes the thing would reply back to you. But most of the time it would say, error, I don't know what you're saying. But now we live in this world where large language models can know what you're saying, and you can layer those things in. So I think that's super, super interesting. I think video games have been playing with procedurally generated worlds for a long time, and have learned that when you just let people procedurally generate worlds, and Hello Games is a really great company to kind of look at. I think they have a game called No Man's Sky that has been evolving for a long time, and you look at the history of it from beginning to end. Initially procedurally generated things, which is the same as saying like, AI, build me every time someone lands on a planet, build me a planet. That's what that game does. The first generation of that game, all the planets were kind of boring. And then they started finding like, it's not really interesting. What can we do? And this sort of, it's not just about like, now the computer can do everything. It's like, how do you really create interesting constraints so that the worlds have certain styles to them? And eventually people started learning things like, hey, these types of worlds have a kind of, and they would also procedurally generate not characters, but like, not monsters, but creatures on the world. And people, the community, and they would engage with the community. The community got obsessed with things that look like dinosaurs with long necks. And so they started being like, finding a world like that was actually really hard. And so they started allowing them to tag those worlds and grow it over time. So I think it's really going to be much more about like, this whole procedurally generated or large language model AI world is changing very fast. But I think there's a lot of cues from video games that you can pull in to see what could happen. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, choose your adventure games is basically the history of most video games. And role-playing games come from a history of Dungeons and Dragons, and they're very number-based, and they're kind of lead to a lot of other things as well. Cool. Question?
How much cool stuff do I add before it doesn't feel like anyone would trust this app anymore because the loading screen is Sonic,
Would it be fun if the loading screen was Sonic? But yeah, I think the question is, first of all, are you trying to design something basic, or are you trying to create a connection with your audience? And I think that's kind of that, because that's actually a very pertinent question. Because I would say in many ways, we do have, hey, hey, the basic thing works. Just do it. Doesn't matter. And maybe the app isn't where you're trying to connect with someone. I don't have any emotional connection with my audience in this app. And if you think that's fine, you don't want to spend money on that, that is okay. That is absolutely okay. But if you want to have some kind of an emotional, deeper connection, then finding ways to say, hey, I want to give someone a sense of trust. So maybe, a graphic that shows something locking and like securing is very different, right? And then trust can come in. Trust can be, is this working? Okay. Trust can be, you're there for me. Like every time I log in, it works, right? And it's like it's the way that it looks like when it loads. Even something as simple as something loading up, right? It's like trust. You could be like, hey, this feels like this thing is like loading up in a way that feels like building blocks. So there are all these like connections that we're making, and we're connecting to people. And the people that we're connecting to are changing too, right? There used to be a generation of people that, music, movies, books were all they did, but we have a generation of people now that grew up with video games too. For them, it's just another medium, right? And so being able to pull from those worlds is actually okay. So I don't think you could get away with putting Sonic in there, but if you created a character that said speed, and that speed equal trust, it might create a more emotional connection with someone. And in a world where all these apps all look the same, someone might choose yours over something else. There's another thing that happens is people forgive things that have personalities. So when you have something that's very transactional and it breaks down, immediately your trust is broken. It's like, transactional didn't break down. I think those people are not here who were building the robotic thing before. And I don't know if that's secret or not, so I won't talk about it, but it's a robot. I think we talked about adding personality to that thing in a very interesting way. And I think the point of it is like, as these AIs come in, as these other automated things come in, choosing how to have personality and tone, even just tone. How do you talk to me? Do you say thank you? Do I say thank you to you? Like when I first got like I think I got Alexa before I got Google, I was very polite to it. It wasn't out of fear. I wasn't like, this thing's going to take over. I'm going to be polite to it now to build some equity. I was polite to it because I was talking in front of my kids, and I don't want my kids to think this is how you talk to something. You're always polite to everything, And so I ended up being polite to it. And it's still sometimes I really enjoy being polite to it, but it's never polite back. And I wish it was. Any other questions? Thoughts? Sorry, I'm not helping your camera stuff by moving around. Yes.
You can speak loud enough, hopefully.
Okay.
I'm curious if you look at all the different places that you've worked, if you see a correlation between the playfulness of the team, company, culture, the playfulness of the things that you're making, and if there is a correlation, what are things that enable that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the culture of the places really matter. I think that I'm using words that I wouldn't have used when I was younger, but I feel like people felt psychologically safe to be able to say, hey, I'm going to be this person in this space. And there might have been like a circle of bravado around, these are designers, they're crazy, let them do their thing, Or it might have been just people feeling like, just we're getting together, we're creating some passion and trying to build something. But there was always, whenever I felt like I was in a place that felt magical, and I've been lucky, I've been very lucky. I've been in a few places where it just feels like this is a moment, we're all doing something really amazing. And looking back, we're like, man, that was a great time. It was always when people were like free to experiment and try things. And then there was a little bit of competitiveness. Maybe that's another kind of playfulness we haven't talked about. There was a little bit of like friendly competition also going on. It's like you wanted to get to work to see what would happen. And that's a great feeling. where people feel seen. The Easter egg is there to kind of give a sense of belonging. So it isn't like, I think sometimes there's this idea that like you give people a reward. There's a reward. I think people maybe click the send button lots of times because they want it to send, and it pops up, hey, I sent it super fast. A rocket ship, it turned into a rocket ship and sent it. That's where like, oh wow, I didn't know you saw that. So if you can find a behavior that someone's doing that they don't think you see them, but you see them, you've turned that digital experience or you've turned that very transactional experience into a human experience. That's where I would recommend you put in your Easter egg. Yeah. So 5 clicks of the send button or something. I don't know. To e-commerce. I don't think I was trying to do this when I was at eBay. A lot of it was just trying to get teams to talk to each other. I think that e-commerce actually has, I'll give you my thoughts just from having worked there. I think e-commerce has a lot of opportunity to have playfulness because it can be very much like, well, depending on your type of e-commerce, right? You're either going with something that's like a big box thing, right? This is like another Amazon. And that was kind of one attempt. That's what eBay was when I was there. But then you have things that are like small scale, Etsy type of relationships. And so I don't know what type of e-commerce you're doing, but like when you have something that's like, hey, I'm trying to have I'm trying to create a very unique store that's competing. I'm not trying to be this monolith. Then think about it just like going to your favorite bookstore. There's a bookstore that I found recently, and I'll tell you something that shocked me. It didn't shock me, it delighted me. It looks like a little tiny bookstore. So it's in, I forget what it's called, but it's kind of like in Marin. And it looks like a little tiny bookstore, and you walk into it, and you don't see it from the entrance until you walk all the way in, and then you look to the left, and it's a giant bookstore with another entrance. And what they did is they took a tiny bookstore and a big bookstore and created a secret passageway between both of them that you can get between. And every other time I've been there, that door just happened to be closed, so I just thought it was a tiny bookstore. And then one time I went, I was like, oh my God, there's this other whole experience that I never had. And it was really delightful, right? It makes me want to go there. I never need to go to a bookstore. I can buy all the books I want on Kindle, right? Or I can buy all the books I want. But just like wanting to go there and sit there. They even have like a big armchair, like a fireplace that you can sit on. That's what you're really, if you're trying to build that, I think there's a lot of opportunities to make things playful. The buy now button. And that didn't used to exist. And so having the ability to buy something now was was hard. Yeah, so this is what I would say then, is not every vendor, every shop, when you have employees, you might be like, hey, this is how you should talk to people. After a certain size, you're like, or maybe you don't even do that. Maybe you just hire people that talk a certain way. Have you seen those old movies where like you have old record stores, like Empire Records? Yeah, so it's like, or like High Fidelity, right? It's like you're hiring people that are like, hey, this is what this store is all about. If you can do that, where it's like, it's not just an AI, it's like, hey, this AI sounds like this. It sounds like John Cusack at High Fidelity. I don't know if you want that, but if that's the personality you want, tone actually really does matter. And so I would recommend that. I think make it a tone, and then in that, little unexpected conversations could be those delighters. And then you think about, the journey isn't just like, let me get you this thing as quickly as possible. You need anything? Do you want anything? Okay, now you're the person who's chasing me around the store. Please give me some space. But someone who's just there and is like, hey, welcome, and then I'm just gonna chill here until you're ready to talk to me. Like just that, that's the way to sort of think through that experience to make it more inviting and playful. Yeah, they would. You go in and be like, "Hey, I want a game. Can you recommend something to me?" Right? And they would be like, "Oh, have you tried this thing? Or this just came out." And it's because they might be really excited in it. So just you want their own passion to carry through. But yeah, in this case, you want a person to be able to kind of train it with that. Cool.
Can you give an example of how playfulness translates into physical object like gaming hardware?
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, it's easy. It's easy when you're making gaming things because the object of those things is to play. But I think in addition to that, in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do with these objects is we're trying to make them playful by, as Logitech, we make things that are all the way from the spectrum of playful to being for work, to being in your home. And if we didn't try to sort of we can add features to it that make it playful. We can say, hey, it has light speed. So it has this connectivity that's really good. So that's a feature that's playful. But we found that in addition to that, thinking about the aesthetics that the object has, the way that you sort of bring it into your desk, does it feel like something that stands out? Or does it merge into something? Or does it just flip back and forth between work and not work? Those are all things that we can sort of adjust through design. And so, an example might be, we had it earlier here, but just sort of the Astro A30s, we have these tags on them. And when you take the tag off, it's iridescent on the inside. And what do we do with that? We cover it up. It's the first thing we put some translucency on top of it. And the reason we do that is it almost like looks like, what's this thing on your head? It's like glowing in a way that I don't realize. It feels otherworldly. And so now you have something that's otherworldly on your desk, Another great example is Alienware did the original Alienware PC looked like alien tech, So that was sort of also feeling very otherworldly. So it's really about sort of giving people these letting them live with these personalities beyond the actual digital experiences. But now they go from that digital world to their desk, and then maybe can go from the desk to their couch, wherever they're playing those games. So. All right. Last question. Johor's pulling me in.
I think like the No Man's Sky idea is pretty interesting. So you have a way to put in restrictions, and then just from your perspective, like there's usually video games there is art to there's the goal, but you have actual playfulness. Like all we have to add or is that it's a lot of like stand out or memorable experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different types of games. I think this is where that idea of like creating a layered experience really comes in, is that you even within No Man's Sky, initially one of the biggest hits that game got was there's nothing to do. It was just amazing technologically, frankly. It was really amazing. But you could easily get lost. And it was like, oh, choose your own adventure, go anywhere. It's like an unlimited adventure box. But what happened is people really wanted something to do. And so in the game, they created this goal for you, this path. Now, that's one layer. You can go to the center of the universe, which the game lets you do, and it has certain breadcrumbs to let you through it, and it holds your hand through that to a certain degree. But then after you're done, and you've learned the mechanics, and maybe this goes into some of the kind of other experiences where it's like, teach them how to learn these mechanics, and then then it's an open toolbox. Then the next layer down is like, do whatever you like. Go continue exploring the universe forever. The game doesn't end when it ends. Experience is just the intro. And then you can play for another 140 hours. So to me, that's really, really fascinating, these ever-living games. Then you add in a layer of other people there too, and being able to share stuff, and it truly becomes phenomenal. Yeah. All right.